Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to focus on a short story about a dystopian society. It also might be the worst short story that I have ever read for this channel, but if I talked about only things that I liked, we would never get anywhere. So this is Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut, and it was published in 1968. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling a lot of people know who Kurt Vonnegut is, but Kurt Vonnegut was a writer who lived in the 1900s, and he died in 2007, known mainly for writing science fiction, although he did also write some satire, mostly known for The Slaughterhouse-Five, which is about war and also space travel, stuff like that. But he also wrote a lot of short stories as well as some nonfiction, some essays and stuff like that. He was successful, although he received a lot of criticism during his time, and some praise as well. This came out a year before Slaughterhouse-Five, when he received the bulk of his praise, but prior to that, not a lot of people were high on him, and I can kind of see why after reading some of his writing today. If you would like a more detailed explanation into the life of Kurt Vonnegut and how he was as a writer, my friend Lucas over at the Bits of Lit made a video that goes a little bit in depth, which is a video that I appreciate, so I'm going to link to it in the description, and perhaps you may watch it and learn more about this interesting author. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about Welcome to the Monkey House. Trigger warning for rape. I'll also put that in the title of the video just so people know. But yeah, I'm going to do a summary, a brief analysis, and we will move on from there. So Welcome to the Monkey House takes place in the future, at least at the time that this was written, in a dystopian society. I say it is a dystopian society because the government controls everything, including the ethical suicide parlors, which are a thing that does not exist in regular topian societies, or paradises or utopias. But it also has ethical birth control, which is a thing where rather than sterilizing individuals, it just numbs the lower extremities so that individuals can't or don't enjoy pleasure and don't seek out sex as a result of it. So a sheriff shows up to one of the ethical suicide parlors and warns the hostesses, Nancy and Mary, that a man named Billy the Poet is on the run. He refuses to take his ethical birth control pill and frequently has sex with the hostesses as a means of exerting control, or as they believe, corrupting the citizens of this world. So the sheriff just warns them and says that he may pop by and try to do something strange in the process. An old man shows up to the suicide parlor, and they're basically walking him through the steps, making sure that he has his last meal, and also listening to the stories that he tells, especially how he knows the person, Edgar J. Nation, or whatever his name is, but J. Edgar Nation, but essentially he created the essential birth control pills after visiting a monkey house at the zoo and seeing that the monkeys were, masturbating and doing all kinds of weird things, and just decided to introduce some morality into the monkey house. And later those pills would be used for the ethical birth control pills that exist in this society. Nancy begins receiving letters at this time, poems, really dirty poems, and she thinks nothing of it. She also gets a phone call from one of Billy the Poet's associates, and as the police track down the phone call, he recites another poem to her, which she doesn't really think a lot of. She just assumes that Billy the Poet is a terrible human being. After the police leave, after they assume that they've captured Billy the Poet, the old man who is at the suicide parlor takes off his disguise and reveals that he is the Billy the Poet, and he proceeds to kidnap Nancy and leave no indication that she's been kidnapped, basically saying that she's run off to New York or something like that. And so he takes her outside, they go into the sewers, and they end up in the Kennedy Museum, which basically goes over the entire Kennedy political family that were big in the 1960s. I think a reflection of Kurt Vonnegut at the time, thinking the Kennedys would become much larger than they probably were. But they're at the museum where Billy's associates are, an even number of men and women, and he asserts that Nancy's going to join them in time of her own volition. And they also give her a truth serum where she reveals that she's 60 years old, but she's taken like de-aging serums or stuff that keeps her like relatively young. And as a result of this, she's still a virgin, as most people are in this society. And so she's like, but it seems kind of pointless under the effects of the truth serum. And so then, she passes out. When she wakes up, Billy and her have a discussion where she talks about how she's not going to give in to Billy, and that he might as well just rape her and get it over with now, because she's not going to give in and join whatever weird society cult thing that he has going on. And he does. He actually, in fact, rapes her. And after it, he seems kind of morose, sad about having to do the whole thing. And she's like, "Why did you do that? Just let me go now. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore." And he says, "Well, you actually are going to join me." And she's like, "Well, how did the other woman deal with it?" And they're like, "Oh, they're grateful for it having happened now." That's right. Vonnegut wrote that women are grateful for having been raped. And he said, Billy goes on to talk about how the society that they're living in is one without pleasure, and they apparently the government has taken away some individual freedoms, and you can have the population control without necessarily getting rid of the pleasure. But the world government worries that if people are having sex only for pleasure, that we'll lose all track of morality or something like that, which is an interesting idea sandwiched between this horrible, weird story that Vonnegut has written. Billy leaves Nancy at the end of the story with a bottle of birth control, presumably the regular type of birth control that doesn't numb your lower extremities. And he says that, you can keep taking these pills and you'll be a nothing head and you can stay with us. But presumably if she doesn't, he'll send her away. So at the end of the story, Nancy looks at the bottle and it says, "Welcome to the Monkey House," a repeat of the story that Billy was talking about when he was disguised, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there seems to be one idea at the center of this story, and that is of control. In the society that Nancy and Mary and the other people are living in, people are controlled mainly through the measures of ethical birth control and suicide. Ethical birth control prevents new people being born into the society, and it also results in people's lower extremities being numbed to the point where they can't enjoy pleasure, and that's a means of controlling them, because if individuals can experience pleasure, I think the implication is that they'll know when they're happy and when they're not, and they'll be more likely to overthrow the government if they're not happy. And also there's the implication that and people are having sex only for pleasure, it's immoral or something like that. So I guess you could insinuate that the society that has controlled this government, or like the people who are in control of this government, are religious types, which you would have seen at the time of them being like, oh, society is going downhill and whatnot. And then there's also the implication that suicide is kind of encouraged here through the ethical suicide parlors, which I think is a sort of reflection of typical views of overpopulation, and how that's a problem of the individual rather than a problem with society itself, how they don't produce enough food, or they won't let enough food go to those who are hungry. And so the only solution in this society is to willingly kill yourself in order to allow it to thrive. And again, that's control, because these messages are being sent to people that free living and individual pleasure is bad, and that you're the root cause of all of society's problems, rather than perhaps the government or the businesses that control the unhappy policies that are being made. It's very like conservative themed in nature. Because you see a lot of conservatives, especially in this day and age, in our real society, saying these kinds of things, like that individuals are responsible for making sure overpopulation doesn't happen, or that sex for pleasure is immoral, homosexuality is immoral, or something like that. So it seems like the conservatives have taken control, and it's a message that I understand with Vonnegut's writing here, because I can see that actually happening in our own society now, how these ideas are beginning to take shape in the wake of climate catastrophe or something like that. However, I think Vonnegut destroys his own message with whatever he says here by having Billy do what he does in this story. Billy is just exerting another form of control in the story in order to get Nancy to believe what he believes. He rapes her, and in doing so, he takes away her autonomy of choice in the situation. If he had explained his side of things or shown her in another unique way that Vonnegut definitely could have done, that would be one thing, like leading her to the decision and then allowing her to make it herself. Instead, he rapes her and then tells a story about this is something that always happened 100 years ago at weddings or like on wedding nights or something like that. And then he says that society is the problem because they've taken away our ability to have sex for pleasure. And he's like, oh, you can take these birth control pills and decide whether to be a part of us. And so it seems like the point that Vonnegut is trying to make is that by becoming a nothing head and becoming an associate of Billy the Poet, you're taking back that control that was taken to you by society. But it really sounds like Billy's okay with many aspects of the society. He would just like it if we could have sex a little bit more. So I don't think Billy is advocating for a better world, just one that he enjoys. And so, I don't think Vonnegut. I don't think Vonnegut considered that he was taking away that control from Nancy in this story. And I think he's leading us to believe that Billy is right, or that his ideas are right. But at that point, at no point does he say, like rape is wrong or anything like that, or that Billy's methods are wrong. So in some twisted way, I think he's arguing that Billy's methods, like the ends, justify the means. And I'm not sure. I absolutely don't believe that that's the case there. I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about, but I don't want to go into any more of the themes or ideas that Vonnegut talks about, because this is a very hideous story. I don't think it's intended to be funny or hilarious. I think that's a byproduct of Vonnegut's writing. How once I started reading it, and once I got to the point where Billy talks about how the other women were grateful for having been raped, I started laughing, because it's like, no, nobody would actually write that. Like, that's a dumb idea right there. Like, that's horrible writing. Like, even I, someone who doesn't write very often, knows that that's terrible writing. That's something that is like a death mark for any story that's being written. It's bad writing. An unnecessary rape scene It's very brief, but it's still unnecessary. And I do think that Vonnegut could have illustrated this exact point in another way, but he fails to do that here. And as a result, I'm looking at this story. It's possibly one of the worst stories that I've ever read for this channel, and maybe even just one of the worst short stories ever written. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut. Again, one of the worst stories that I've ever read. Do not bother reading it, and I have serious doubts as to whether I should read Kurt Vonnegut in the future. Lucas from Over the Bits of Lit, who I've talked about before, he actually has frequently told me that Vonnegut is a bad writer, but I always thought that maybe he was being dramatic in that way, like, oh, just being hyperbolous or something like that. But I can see now if Vonnegut's writing is similar to what he has written here, then I absolutely do not want to read anything else that Vonnegut has written. To say that Nancy should be grateful for having been raped and been shown the way is some of the worst writing and most abhorrent writing that I have ever experienced. You might say, oh, well, like, at least Vonnegut made you feel something. Yeah, he made me feel repulsed that Vonnegut actually bothered to put his pen to paper and write those words. So, don't even bother reading Vonnegut. I hope this has discouraged many people from ever considering Vonnegut in the future. If you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I've said, do so below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about how horrible Kurt Vonnegut is as a writer. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and monkeyish travels. Farewell.